a little bit about how you're preparing for the debate, right? Because we see that President Biden is out at Camp David. You're on the campaign trail. What's your strategy for the debate?
Well, this is really the best strategy right here. We have all these people screaming questions, and I look forward to the debate. We just did Faith and Freedom, as you know, in D.C., and now we're here for a big rally about 10 minutes away at the Temple Arena. And we have it packed. We have lines that are going a mile long, and it's an honor.
That's Donald Trump, of course, speaking out as he prepares to take on Biden at the CNN presidential debate this Thursday. The former president rallying thousands of supporters in Philly as Biden spends the weekend hunkering down at Camp David.
Trump 2024 National Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt joins us now. Karoline, so great to have you on. We're talking about debate prep. The president saying he's doing it by being on the campaign trail. I just heard him on the All In podcast, and he was so sharp and answering such a wide range of topics. I think these podcasts are great because he's just getting challenged and he's able to really express how he feels about a whole lot of issues.
Absolutely. And that's what President Trump is going to continue to do ahead of the debate next Thursday. Continue with his very busy campaign schedule. He has held 2 rallies in the past week in Wisconsin and a big one in Philadelphia last night. He gave another speech yesterday in Washington, D.C. It's a sharp contrast to what Joe Biden is doing, hiding away in the woods at Camp David, having his handlers drill into his brain what he needs to say next Thursday. President Trump knows what he's going to say. He's going to relay his vision to make this country great again. And Joe Biden can get all of the rest he wants. Frankly, I think it's concerning that we have a president who can't do debate prep and also run the country at the same time. He has to go hide away. But nevertheless, the real test for him next week is going to be, can he defend his indefensible policies, his record high inflation crisis that is robbing families, and his immigration invasion that is leading to a loss of American life across this country.
Yeah, you know, Carolyn, I think, as Rachel pointed out, these podcasts and as Trump says, taking all of these Q&As from a horde of reporters or even doing the rallies, it does provide you prep because you see all the pitches. You see a lot of different things coming at you, and so nothing comes as a surprise. That being said, a debate is a different format. I mean, and he's agreed, you guys have agreed to a lot of stipulations. I don't even know if you've agreed to the latest, which is Joe Biden wanted to sit down during the debate. I don't know if that one was agreed to or not, sit, stand. But my point is, you still have to sort of practice the strategy. So I'm curious, what is President Trump doing to practice the mechanics of how this actual debate will go? And really quickly to add to that, will he be aggressive like he was in the first debate last time against Joe Biden? Or will he be, in the second and third, he took a little bit more congenial approach to Joe Biden?
Well, President Trump is going to be President Trump, but he will be focused on the policies that made this country great in his first term and his solutions to fix many of the crises that Joe Biden's policies have created over the past few years. He'll be reminding voters just how much better their lives were under his leadership than they are today under Joe Biden's leadership. And as you just said, President Trump is prepared because he's constantly talking directly to the American people. He was in a cheesesteak shop yesterday in Philadelphia taking questions from Americans. He does hostile media interviews with the press all the time. And President Trump is fully aware of what he's walking into. This is going to be a 3-on-1 debate. Make no mistake about it. It's with Crooked Joe and 2 anchors who have been covering for Joe Biden and his crime family for years and lying about President Trump. But I think it speaks to President Trump's courage and his determination to fight for this country, that he's willing to go into a hostile environment to bring his message directly to the American voters.
It's certainly not the first hostile environment that he's walked into. But it is kind of interesting,
right,
to listen to on the Democrat side. The Biden campaign seems to be sort of helping try to lower the expectations. They're talking about how Joe Biden is practicing standing up for 90 minutes at a time. Is there any level of concern that that the Biden campaign might successfully lower expectations for Joe Biden so much that he just barely overperforms and then they walk away with a good news story because of that?
Well, again, I will reiterate the fact that there are reports that our president, the leader of the free world, is having to practice standing up for 90 minutes is very, very concerning. President Trump gave an 80-minute He gave an 80-minute speech last night, and he does that multiple times a week to crowds of thousands of people. But yes, the Democrats certainly are trying to lower expectations for this debate, and the mainstream media is helping them do that. But again, the question is not whether Joe Biden can stand up there for an hour and a half. It's what are his answers? What are his solutions to change the trajectory of this country? What's his solution to put more money back into the pockets of struggling families? What's his solution to shut down this southern border? Because we haven't seen one, and his immigration invasion continues to wreak havoc across this great country. How's Joe Biden going to end the war in Ukraine and stand up for our ally Israel in the Middle East? He has not proposed solutions to any of these crises that continue to hurt our country, and he needs to do that on Thursday night.
Karoline, I was talking with some friends about the debate, and one of the people I was talking to expressed frustration from the last debate about Donald Trump, saying there were moments when he could have let Joe Biden hang himself, really. You know, that Joe Biden was going off and was getting himself in trouble. This could happen even, there's more, I think, a greater chance, 4 years later. We all know he's on decline. Maybe he's buffering. Maybe he's digging himself into a hole with China and everything else. Has Donald Trump and his debate team talked about sort of, it's good to be aggressive, but if Joe Biden is digging himself into a hole, kind of just holding back and letting Joe go?
Well, I won't get into our specific strategy, Rachel, but I will say that, again, President Trump is going to be prepared to focus on policy, talk about his solutions to make this country great again. And Joe Biden, we can expect a whole bunch of lies on Thursday night. He's been lying to the American people, saying that the economy is working. We know that not to be true. He's lied to the American people, saying he's done everything he can to secure the border. That is an absolute lie that everyone knows is not true. And his team this past week has been lying to the American people, trying to say that we have edited these videos of Joe Biden clearly cognitively declining, wandering around at the G7, wandering off of stage at a Hollywood fundraiser. Those are lies. These are real videos for the entire world to see. So on Thursday night, the American people will again be able to see Joe Biden with their own eyes and determine if he is fit enough to serve as president for another 4 years, which the majority of the country right now does not believe he can.
Yeah.
All right, Karoline Leavitt, thank you so much.
Thank you, Karoline.
Great to see you.
Because I am so looking forward. Thank you, Karoline.